Most people believe peace comes from learning how to control what they feel, but what if it actually begins the moment you stop trying so hard? There's a quiet exhaustion that comes from carrying emotions like they're problems to fix, as if your own heart were something slightly inconvenient. Maybe you've felt that too. The heaviness after holding everything together all day. The strange loneliness of being fine when you're not. It can make you wonder if calm is reserved for people built differently. Yet sometimes the door to peace isn't locked at all. It's just waiting for a softer touch. This story is for the ones who feel deeply and are tired of apologizing for it. For those who have tried both hiding and fighting their emotions and found neither brings relief. There is a gentler way to live with what you feel, one that doesn't require becoming colder or stronger in the usual sense. Imagine discovering that the very sensitivity you thought was a weakness could become a steady source of quiet strength. Not overnight, not perfectly, but in a way that feels human and possible. The kind of change that begins so subtly you almost miss it. Somewhere in this story, you may recognize a piece of yourself, in a glance, a pause, a small gesture that says more than words. It won't offer grand solutions or complicated steps, only something simple that most people overlook. A way of holding your inner world that allows it to settle instead of surge. If you've ever wished for a calmer relationship with your own feelings, stay a little longer. You might find that peace has been closer than it seemed, waiting patiently for you to meet it halfway. He used to say his feelings arrived like sudden summer storms, loud and uninvited, drenching whatever peace he had managed to hang out to dry. On certain mornings, even the sound of a cup touching the table felt like too much, as if the world had forgotten to lower its voice. He worried he might snap at someone he loved, or worse, go quiet in that heavy way that made people step back without knowing why. It wasn't that he wanted to be distant, he just didn't trust what might spill out if he loosened his grip. Somewhere inside, though, there was a small, persistent wish to feel everything without being swept away by it. When emotions rose, he felt them first in his chest, a tightness like holding a fragile glass sphere too firmly, afraid it might slip. He imagined that if he relaxed even a little, it would shatter on the floor and expose something raw and embarrassing. So he alternated, clenching until his hands ached, then suddenly letting go and watching the pieces scatter. Neither way felt right, but he didn't know another. People called him sensitive, as if it were a polite way of saying breakable. Late at night, he would sit by the window, palms open, pretending the invisible sphere rested there again, whole this time. He'd whisper to it, not words exactly, more like quiet acknowledgments that the day had been heavy. Oddly, those were the moments when the tightness eased, when he didn't feel on the verge of bursting or disappearing. He wondered, not for the first time, whether gentleness might hold what force never could. The thought felt almost rebellious, like discovering a door where there had only been wall. Once, after a sharp comment from a stranger lingered longer than it should have, he stepped outside and tried a small experiment. He placed a hand over his heart and breathed slowly, as if warming cold fingers, counting just enough to keep his mind from running off. The feeling didn't vanish, but it softened around the edges, the way ice begins to lose its bite when held carefully. He stood there, surprised, as if he had stumbled upon a quiet trick no one had bothered to mention. It made him curious about what else he'd misunderstood. Still, the fear remained, that one day the storm would be too strong, the sphere too fragile, his hands too tired. He watched others move through life with what looked like effortless balance and assumed they possessed some hidden sturdiness he lacked. Yet sometimes, when he looked closely, he noticed the same careful way they held their own invisible burdens. It left him wondering if no one was as steady as they seemed, and if there might be someone, somewhere, who had learned a kinder way to carry what trembles. In the days that followed, he kept returning to that quiet experiment, as if his hands had memorized something his mind was still catching up to. The glass sphere in his imagination no longer felt like an enemy to restrain, but something living that responded to how it was held. When he tightened, it clouded and trembled. When he softened, it cleared, almost warm against his palms. It puzzled him, this gentle cause and effect, as though his emotions had been waiting for permission rather than discipline. He began to suspect that peace wasn't something you forced into place, but something that unfolded when pressure eased. One afternoon, while watching rain slide slowly down the window, he noticed how each drop found its own path without being pushed. It struck him that feelings might be like that too, not obstacles to block, but movements to allow. He tested the idea the next time a memory surfaced and stung, resisting the urge to shove it away. Instead, he breathed once, then again, holding the sphere lightly in his mind as if it were made of thin light. The pain didn't disappear, but it stopped shouting, as though it had been heard at last. He realized how much energy he'd spent trying to become someone less affected, less porous, less himself. Yet every attempt had only made the sphere heavier, harder to carry without dropping. When he treated his feelings with the same patience he might offer a frightened bird, they settled sooner, their frantic flutter quieting. It felt almost backwards, this idea that softness could be a form of strength. Still, his shoulders lowered in a way they hadn't in years, which seemed reason enough to keep going. There were setbacks, of course, moments when sharp words or sudden loneliness made him clutch the sphere again, knuckles whitening out of habit. But even then, he noticed the tension more quickly. Like catching himself mid-stride before walking into a wall, he'd pause, sometimes just for a breath or two, and imagine loosening his grip by a single degree. It was such a small adjustment that no one around him would have noticed, yet inside it felt like turning a key. Something in him was learning that compassion wasn't indulgence, it was steadiness. And quietly, almost shyly, a new thought took root. Maybe emotional strength wasn't about becoming unshakable, but about becoming tender enough to bend without breaking. He didn't announce this discovery to anyone, not even to himself in clear words, but it lingered in the way he moved through the day. The sphere seemed less like a burden now, and more like a guide, responding to every shift in his touch. He had the sense that if he kept following this thread of gentleness, it might lead him to someone who understood it far better than he did. For as long as he could remember, he had carried a quiet embarrassment about how easily things reached him. A careless joke, a delayed reply, a door closed a little too firmly. Each one landed like a small stone dropped into deep water. He'd smile it off in public, then replay the moment later, wondering why it hurt when it seemed not to touch anyone else. The glass sphere in his mind would grow heavy on those days, as if absorbing every unspoken bruise. He began to suspect there was something inside him that hadn't been built for the ordinary weather of life, so he tried to contain it. He told himself to toughen up, to stop noticing so much, to keep the sphere locked away where it couldn't betray him. For a while that worked, or at least it looked like it did from the outside. But feelings have a way of slipping through cracks, and his would surge out at the most inconvenient times, leaving him flushed with regret. He'd apologize too quickly, retreat too far, then promise himself he'd do better next time. Other times, the opposite happened. A wave of emotion would rise so suddenly that he couldn't hold it back, like water spilling over the rim of a bowl filled too close to the edge. He'd speak sharply when he meant to be kind, or fall silent when words were needed most. Afterwards, shame would settle over him like dust, fine and stubborn, convincing him he was too fragile for the rough edges of the world. He started to believe he was either sealed shut or spilling over, nothing in between. Late one evening, after a conversation that left him feeling strangely exposed, he sat alone and pictured the sphere again, this time with a thin crack running through it. He held it carefully in his imagination, afraid even his thoughts might widen the fracture. "You're not meant for this," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the object or to himself. The room felt very still, as if waiting to see what he would do next. Yet beneath the shame, there was a quieter feeling he didn't quite recognize at first, a tiredness from fighting his own nature for so long. He rested his hands on the table, palms open, as if offering the invisible sphere somewhere safe to sit. For a moment, nothing changed, but he noticed he wasn't bracing for impact either. It crossed his mind that maybe the problem wasn't that he was too fragile, but that he had never been shown how to hold something delicate without fear. A few days later, while wandering through a small market he didn't remember deciding to visit, he noticed a stall filled with simple handmade objects. Among them sat a clear glass sphere, no larger than both hands cupped together, catching the morning light in a way that made everything inside it look softer. He picked it up almost without thinking, surprised by its warmth, as if it had been waiting for someone to notice. When he held it too tightly, his fingers squeaked faintly against the surface, and the distortion inside sharpened. Instinctively, he loosened his grip, and the light settled again, calm and steady. He bought it, though he couldn't quite explain why, and carried it home as carefully as if it contained something alive. On the walk back, Every bump in the pavement made him adjust his hold, not out of fear, but out of a growing attentiveness. He realized he wasn't rushing the way he usually did. The fragile weight had changed his pace. It was oddly grounding, this need to move with intention instead of urgency. For once, his mind wasn't racing ahead. It was right there in his hands. At home, he placed the sphere on the table and watched how it reflected the room, bending ordinary shapes into quiet curves. When he touched it again, gently this time, he felt a small easing in his chest, like something inside him recognized the gesture. He tried an experiment, a slow breath in, a slower breath out, fingertips resting lightly on the glass. The tightness that had followed him all morning loosened, not dramatically, just enough to notice. He almost laughed at how simple it was, as if he'd been searching for complicated answers to a very quiet question. Throughout the day, he found himself returning to the sphere whenever emotions stirred. After a curt email, a memory that surfaced uninvited, a sudden wave of loneliness. Each time, he'd steady it with both hands, reminding himself without words that nothing fragile responds well to force. The object became a kind of mirror, showing him how quickly tension traveled from his thoughts into his body. When he softened his shoulders, the glass seemed to glow more clearly, as though approving of the adjustment. It felt less like a possession and more like a companion in a language he was just beginning to understand. That evening, as the sky dimmed, he noticed something new. The sphere didn't demand anything from him except presence. It didn't ask him to fix, hide, or explain what he felt. It only asked to be held with care. He wondered who had first learned that gentleness could steady what fear only unsettles. And as he sat there, turning the sphere slowly in his palms, he had the faint sense that someone, somewhere, already knew exactly how to do this. He met the mentor on an ordinary afternoon that didn't seem important enough to change anything. The man was sitting on a park bench, feeding small crumbs to birds that approached without hesitation, as if they recognized something unhurried in him. When he noticed the glass sphere in the young man's hands, he didn't ask questions right away. He simply shifted slightly, making space on the bench. It was such a small gesture, but it carried the quiet message that nothing needed to be explained before being accepted. For reasons he couldn't name, the young man sat down. They watched the birds for a while, the kind of silence that feels less like emptiness and more like a shared pause. At one point, the young man admitted, almost apologetically, that he didn't quite know why he had bought the sphere. The mentor nodded as if he understood perfectly, then asked if he could hold it for a moment. There was no urgency in his voice, no curiosity that felt invasive, just calm, steady attention, like someone asking to hold a sleeping child. When the sphere passed into the mentor's hands, something unexpected happened. Nothing at all. He didn't inspect it, didn't test its weight, didn't turn it under the light to analyze it. He simply cradled it loosely between his palms, shoulders relaxed, as though fragility were not a problem to solve but a condition to respect. The young man felt his own breathing slow in response, mirroring the unspoken rhythm. It was the first time he had seen someone handle the object without caution, edged by fear. "Most things that tremble," the mentor said softly, eyes still on the sphere, "aren't asking to be controlled. They're asking to feel safe." He spoke the words the way one might place a blanket over someone who has fallen asleep in a chair, gently, without making a point of it. The young man noticed that the glass seemed clearer in the older man's hands, the light inside it steady instead of scattered. He wondered if the change was real, or if his own tension had been clouding it all along. When the mentor returned the sphere, he didn't offer instructions or advice, only a small, reassuring smile. The young man held it again, this time noticing how his fingers naturally softened, as if they had learned something just by watching. A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from somewhere nearby, and he felt a quiet shift he couldn't quite describe. It occurred to him that meeting this stranger might not have been accidental at all, though he wasn't sure yet what it meant. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The Weight of Stones That Are Not Yours and More 2 Bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. They met again the next day, as if the park itself had arranged it. The same bench waiting in a patch of gentle shade. The young man admitted that since their last conversation, he had been holding the sphere differently, though he couldn't explain how he knew to do it. The mentor listened with a quiet attentiveness that made even halting words feel welcome. After a pause, he said, almost to the breeze, "Peace begins the moment you stop arguing with what you feel." The sentence landed softly, yet it seemed to echo somewhere deep inside. He asked the young man to place the sphere between his hands without gripping it, just resting it there as though it could stay on its own. At first, the young man's fingers twitched, the old reflex to secure it rising like muscle memory. But the mentor's calm presence made it easier to resist the urge, to let the glass simply exist in the cradle of his palms. He noticed how the tension in his chest mirrored the tension in his hands, both easing by tiny degrees. It was less like learning a new skill and more like remembering something he had forgotten. Feelings grow louder when they're pushed away, the mentor continued, his tone gentle, almost conversational. But when they're allowed to sit beside you, they stop shouting. The young man closed his eyes for a moment, imagining a recent hurt he had tried to outrun, letting it hover there, without judgment. The intensity didn't vanish, but it lost its sharp edges, becoming something he could look at without flinching. He realized he had spent years bracing against waves that only wanted to pass through. They sat like that for a while, the world moving quietly around them, footsteps on gravel, distant voices, the rustle of leaves overhead. The young man found himself breathing in a slow, steady rhythm, as if his body had finally found a pace it trusted. A strange thought surfaced. Maybe emotions weren't storms to survive, but signals to understand. He felt no need to say this aloud. The mentor seemed to sense it anyway, offering a small nod that felt like agreement. When he opened his eyes, the sphere appeared almost luminous, not because it had changed, but because he had. Holding it lightly no longer felt risky. It felt natural, like carrying something precious that didn't need guarding. He wondered how many other parts of his life might soften if approached the same way. And as the mentor stood to leave, promising nothing and explaining even less, the young man sensed that the real lesson had only just begun to unfold. In the weeks that followed, the young man began to notice small changes that didn't announce themselves, like dawn arriving without fanfare. When irritation flickered after a careless remark, he would pause, fingertips brushing the surface of the glass sphere in his pocket. The familiar urge to react softened, replaced by a quiet curiosity about what the feeling needed. Sometimes it was as simple as one steady breath, sometimes just the silent admission, "That hurt more than I expected." Oddly, naming it seemed to shrink its weight. There were moments of vulnerability too, the kind that made him wonder if he was doing it wrong. One evening, loneliness crept in so suddenly that he nearly retreated into his old habits, closing himself off before it could sting. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed, holding the sphere with both hands, letting the ache exist without dressing it up or pushing it away. It didn't disappear, but it stopped feeling like a threat. He even managed a faint smile, surprised that something so uncomfortable could also feel honest. At work, when criticism landed sharper than intended, he felt the familiar tightening in his chest. This time, though, he didn't rush to defend himself or withdraw into silence. He imagined loosening his grip on the invisible sphere, shoulders dropping a fraction, feet steady on the floor. The conversation passed without the usual aftershock, leaving behind a sense of quiet steadiness. He walked away thinking that perhaps strength could look a lot like restraint wrapped in kindness. Not every day was smooth, of course. There were still sudden waves, old reflexes, moments when he caught himself clenching too hard again. But now he noticed sooner, adjusting gently rather than scolding himself for slipping. It felt less like fixing a flaw and more like tending a delicate instrument, tuning it with patience instead of force. Even his laughter came easier, carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. People began to respond differently, though no one could have said exactly why. Conversations felt less tense, silences less awkward, as if his calm had quietly invited others to set down their own burdens. He sensed that something inside him was becoming steadier, not by hardening, but by learning how to yield without collapsing. And sometimes, when he caught the reflection of light through the sphere, he wondered what would happen when this new way of being met a moment that truly tested it. The moment came on a crowded afternoon when patience was already running thin, the kind of day when even small inconveniences feel personal. A stranger's sharp words cut across a simple misunderstanding, loud enough that others turned to look. He felt the old surge instantly, heat rising, chest tightening, the urge to defend himself or disappear. For a split second, his hands curled as if searching for the sphere that wasn't there. Then he remembered it didn't need to be in his pocket to exist. He paused, just long enough to place one quiet breath between feeling and reaction. In that space, he imagined holding the glass sphere again, steady and light, as though the moment itself were something fragile. The stranger's frustration no longer sounded like an attack, more like a spillover from a day he knew nothing about. When he spoke, his voice came out calm, almost gentle, surprising even him. The tension shifted, not dramatically, but enough for the sharp edge to dull. Later, replaying the encounter in his mind, he noticed the absence of the usual aftertaste, no lingering shame, no rehearsed arguments echoing in his head. Instead, there was a quiet satisfaction, the kind that doesn't need applause. He realized that by softening his grip, he had changed the shape of the moment itself. It felt less like winning or losing and more like stepping out of a pattern that had repeated for years. He carried that realization the way one carries a warm cup on a cold day. That evening he wrote a single sentence in a small notebook, "Gentleness held where force once lived." The words looked simple on the page, almost understated, but they carried the weight of something hard-earned. He closed the notebook and rested his hands around the sphere, noticing how natural the gesture had become. It occurred to him that peace wasn't a distant place he had to reach, but a way of holding what was already here. The thought settled quietly, like dust finally finding the ground. As night deepened, he sensed that this practice of pausing, breathing, and softening would meet him again in countless ordinary moments. A disappointed glance, an unanswered message, a memory that surfaced uninvited. Each one would be another chance to choose tenderness over reflex. He didn't expect perfection, only the willingness to remember. And somewhere in that quiet willingness, he felt the story continuing to unfold, leading him toward something even simpler than peace. One quiet morning, as sunlight slipped gently across the floor, he remembered something the mentor had once said without making it sound like instruction. So he sat down, placed the glass sphere in his lap, and rested a hand over his chest, as if greeting an old friend. "Name what's here," the mentor had murmured, almost casually, as though emotions were guests rather than intruders. He tried it now, whispering a single word for the feeling he couldn't ignore. To his surprise, the word didn't trap the feeling. It gave it somewhere to rest. He took a slow breath in, then let it out as if fogging a window, shoulders lowering on their own. The sensation inside him shifted, not vanishing but becoming less tangled, easier to sit with. He imagined the sphere absorbing the excess, holding it safely so his hands didn't have to strain. It felt a bit awkward at first, like learning a dance step alone in an empty room. But there was also a quiet relief in not pretending everything was fine. Later that day, when a sudden wave of anxiety surfaced for no clear reason, he repeated the small ritual standing by the sink, hand to chest. One honest word, one unhurried breath, nothing elaborate, nothing anyone else would notice. The feeling passed through more quickly this time, like a cloud drifting instead of settling in. He even caught himself smiling at the simplicity of it, as if he had discovered a hidden pocket of calm in an old coat. It was almost humbling, how little it required. He began to see how this tiny practice could fit anywhere, in a parked car before going inside, in a quiet corner of a crowded room, even in the brief pause before answering a difficult message. The sphere didn't need to be visible. It had become something he carried inwardly, a reminder of how to hold what trembles. Each time he paused this way, the day felt less like something happening to him, and more like something he could meet with steadiness. He wondered how many others might be longing for such a simple refuge. As evening settled, he placed the sphere back on the table and watched the last light gather inside it, soft and unhurried. He had the sense that this small ritual was not an ending, but a doorway, something that would quietly reshape the way he moved through the world. If peace could grow from gestures this gentle, perhaps it was closer than anyone realized, and the thought lingered, inviting him to see what might unfold if he kept choosing tenderness, even when no one was watching. Over time, he stopped thinking of his heart as a problem to solve and began to treat it more like something entrusted to his care. The glass sphere remained on the table, catching light in quiet ways that no longer startled him. He noticed how instinctively he reached for gentleness now, not because he had mastered anything, but because harshness felt out of place. It was as if he had learned the true weight of what he carried and no longer resented it. Even difficult feelings seemed less like intruders and more like signals asking to be received. One afternoon, a friend arrived burdened with worries she couldn't quite put into words. He listened without interrupting, hands resting loosely around the sphere, not as a shield, but as a reminder. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing in response to his calm, as though she had borrowed steadiness without realizing it. He understood then that the way he held his own emotions shaped the space others stepped into. Peace, it seemed, was quietly contagious. He still had moments of doubt, of course, mornings when old fears brushed against him like a chill. Yet instead of bracing, he would place his palm over his chest, acknowledging the tremor without apology. The sensation would soften, the way a restless child settles when met with patience rather than reprimand. He no longer asked himself why he felt so much. He simply made room for it. That shift alone felt like a kind of freedom. Sometimes, in the hush before sleep, he would turn the sphere slowly in his hands and watch the room bend gently in its surface. The distortions no longer unsettled him. They reminded him that perception softens when held with care. He sensed a quiet harmony forming between what he felt and how he responded, like two notes finally learning to resonate. Nothing dramatic had changed, yet everything felt more livable, more kind. And in those still moments, as the last light faded and the world exhaled into silence, he understood something simple and enduring. When you treat your inner life as something precious instead of problematic, peace doesn't need to be chased. It settles on its own, like dust in a sunbeam, visible only when you stop stirring the air. He rested his hands beside the sphere, no longer guarding it, just keeping it company. Outside, the night was calm, and for once, so was he.